Welcome back. We turn our attention now to Syria, where after more than a decade of war, a long-awaited moment is beginning to take shape. The first trial linked to the Assad-Era is now underway and is marking a significant and I think symbolic step towards accountability for crimes committed during one of the most devastating conflicts of our time. And I think it's been a long time coming. For years now, there've been calls for justice that have echoed from survivors, from families of the disappeared, and human rights organizations, and many of whom have accused the Syrian state of widespread abuses, including torture, arbitrary detention, and enforced disappearance. It was a horrible time in Syrian history. And now, as proceedings begin, the question, I think we can all agree, is not only about whether or not justice can be delivered, but what justice actually looks like in a country still fractured, still grieving, still trying to rebuild and recover from a civil war that took so much away from so many people. And to help us understand how significant this moment is, we're joined by Humanitarian, an educator based in Syria, a very good friend of the nation, Maseeha Saloojee. Maseeha, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Pleasure is all ours, and I think we'll jump right into it. For our listeners who are listening here in South Africa and all across the world, can you just give us a sense and help us understand the significance of this moment, this trial that's happening, and give us a bit more background of it if you can, and why it matters so much right now for Syria?
Well, the thing is, like you mentioned, it's been 13 years of war, devastation, hardship, torture, and the problem is during those 13 years there was no accountability for any kinds of punishments carried out by the old regime of Syria. People had been hoping and even thinking perhaps that that day of finally seeing some sort of justice would never come. So alhamdulillah, when the start of the trial finally occurred a couple of days ago, it was a big moment of relief for Syrians that even though perhaps many of the victims of the war would never be able to fully regain a sense of justice. Some of them, their perpetrators may have died during the war itself, or may have left. Bashar al-Assad, as we know, himself fled to Moscow. But one person who is known for carrying out injustices against the Syrian people hopefully will see some sort of justice. And that is a big soothing balm for the people of Syria to know that, inshallah, at least some of that justice will be served.
Very, very important. I want to talk about symbolism versus the substance of this case. Do you feel it's a meaningful step towards accountability, or a largely symbolic kind of act in the absence of broader systemic justice?
I don't think we could ever fully do justice. I don't think that's possible. We're speaking of mass murders that had occurred. We're speaking of torture, trauma that has caused, which can never ever be undone. I mean, one of the, but like you said, like the symbolism thereof, I think that's the most important thing for the victims. One of the people who was present at the trial was Muawiyah, who was the boy who wrote on the wall in 2011 that it's your turn, doctor, and who was subsequently arrested by the very person who is on trial right now, Atif Najib. His fingernails pulled out. He was tortured quite badly before he was returned to his family. Alhamdulillah, he returned live and whole, but not whole, but he returned alive. Eventually grew his fingernails back. But many other victims of this kind of system didn't ever go back to their families, or their bodies were returned broken. The famous Hamza Khatib, who was well known as the martyr of the revolution. People like that, they can never find full justice, I think, in this life, unfortunately. But hopefully it is some one step towards that, and some sort of peace for the families.
As I'm listening to you speak, as a South African, I'm almost reminded of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we had here after the subsequent ending of apartheid. Is it a similar kind of process from your perspective? And do you think the victims and the families of these atrocious acts, many of whom have waited years, what do you think this trial could represent for them? Is it a a moment to start that healing process and to open a different chapter in their lives?
Well, we do hope so, but like we've seen in South Africa as well, years of apartheid is not undone by a few, a few steps to try and resolve that. Going forward, we can hope for better, but you can never undo the injustice, in the sense that a lot of those acts that were done linger in the people who are alive today. Things like missed opportunities that would affect generations to come. And part of the problem we had here as well, which I think we suffered from during apartheid in South Africa too, is the fact that you have people in power who are not even easily removed from power even after the liberation, because it requires a change of an entire system. So, even when they had this trial 2-3 days ago, while there was a lot of hope and relief from many people, there was also some who felt skeptic, because they said, like, there's still some criminals, known criminals, who still retain governmental positions, because it's not possible for the government to just to take them out and replace them with someone else, because of the weight that position holds, the skill it requires, the experience that is required. People who had been oppressed for 13, 14 years don't have the capacity to just step into that role overnight. So I think things like that are not things that could just be regained overnight, and it will take a very, very long time, maybe more than one generation even, before a full turn of events can occur.
I want to touch on that point that you're making, the fact that you still have some members of the Assad government remaining in power. How accessible and transparent are these proceedings to ordinary Syrians, number one? And number two, given that point that you still have members of the Assad government in those strategic positions, how does it shape the perception of the trial's credibility? Are they taken with a pinch of salt, maybe because of the systems and the individuals that are still in place from that time?
Well, I think there's two things to consider here. Firstly, it's alhamdulillah, it's a public open trial that they're trying to have. So they're trying to have as much transparency as possible. The benefits of such a thing is, firstly, people who who don't have a clue what's going on obviously get to know. Secondly, more victims are coming forward, not just victims, but even more videos and evidence is surfacing as time goes on. In fact, yesterday, some unknown account apparently put out like videos of the Assad-Era prison, new videos that hadn't surfaced since the liberation in 2024. So it helps to bring more evidence to light. It would help to prosecute people whom they have no evidence against right now, because it's very easy to remove someone from. I mean, physically, it's easy to remove someone from power, but to justify that removal, there has to be a reason for it. And just going off the word of someone who says, this particular person, we know that he was a criminal, he was part of the whole criminal system, it's not enough, unfortunately. I mean, if you want to have transparency and proper evidence presented. So I think that's hopefully part of this whole trial process being public, is to bring forward more people to hopefully unearth more evidence. When they started the court proceedings as well, they started it off saying defendant number one, Bashar al-Assad, because obviously Atif Najib wasn't the head guy of this whole thing. He's like the one who carried out a lot of atrocities, or ordered the carrying out of a lot of atrocities in Dar'a. He was also the one who made apparently that statement, allegedly claimed that when the people requested the return of their children, people like Hamza Khatib's mother, when they asked for him to be sent back when they thought he was still alive, and he's apparently stated, forget your children, go and make more children, and if you feel you're not man enough to do it, then send us your wives and we'll do it. Like this kind of ridiculous, disgusting statements from a man like that. So it's a start, but the actual defendant, the first person to be called up, or not be called up, but the first person in the court whose name was stated was Bashar al-Assad. Obviously, him not being present, it's not a case yet against him, but we're hoping that it will lead to a trial in absentia, because as we've heard yesterday or the day before, Shara as well formally requested Putin to hand over Bashar al-Assad. So hopefully, if this claim is rejected, it can at least lead to a trial in absentia if he isn't physically returned.
There's been a lot of conversation around the risk of selective justice here. Is that concern genuine? The fact that accountability may be selective, targeting some actors while others are essentially shielded from it?
I think it's very difficult to balance justice. I wouldn't. I personally do believe, I might have too much good opinions, but I personally do believe that the government is trying to get to the point where everyone who should be held accountable will be held accountable. But at the same time, they're trying to continue to run the state in a way that it deserves to be run. And Syria is basically, as far as I know, the only country over the past 300 years that has managed to not go into a recession after a civil war. And one of the reasons for that is because they were forced to let some people keep their jobs, because if you just come over, take over, and change people over, people who are not qualified or not experienced enough for a certain job is not going to be able to do it as well as those who had been in that position. So it's not just a case of, I don't think it's just a case of we selectively choosing who we wish to meet our justice to, but at the same time, you have to look at being sympathetic to people's sense of betrayal and loss over the years. There has been cases of injustice as well from the side of, the I don't want to say from the side of the new government, but from the people who had been against the old government. We saw that earlier in 2025, where random raids were carried out on the coast. People, lost homes, lost cars. Some people were killed as well. And I think that a lot of people will use that kind of use to claim that the government is not, being just in the way who they try. But I do think that they are trying as far as they can to be sympathetic as well to the fact that people are suffering from a lot of years of trauma and grief and injustice. And things like that are going to happen, but they have to make sure that they are around to control that and to not allow it to get out of hand. So it's a difficult path to find that balance between being sympathetic to people's pain and injury, while at the same time holding everyone who deserves to be held accountable.
Very, very important, Maseeha. We're going to video for now, but I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon as more developments emerge from this process. I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam, there you go. That's Maseeha Saloojee joining us from Syria, where the pursuit for justice is beginning to take shape. Even as you heard there from Maseeha, the scars of war remain deeply etched into the fabric of the Syrian society. And yeah, as this trial unfolds, I think we'll be following it quite closely to see if there'll be any, developments that are very, very key. I'm sure there'll be many. And they're going to be raising very, very serious questions about, international solidarity and justice, not just for Syria, but for other parts of the world. And with that, we've come to the end of today's edition of News and Views. Thank you so much for staying with us for the past 2 hours and 12 minutes. I'll be back with you again tomorrow for the Wednesday edition of the show. Sorry. Coming up next is Mid-Morning Tuesdays with Julie Ali. And I'll be back with you again, as I mentioned, tomorrow. For myself, Salah, and everyone that made today's edition a possibility. Bye for now. Shap, shap.